The recorded music business is a small part of the entire music business. From education straight through to all of the ways that music is involved in our lives, Grammys and charts are a fraction, a small fraction. And yet we look at that as the measure of success.
We're indoctrinated every single day that this is the definition of success. If my bank account doesn't have this many zeros, or I have to do X, Y, and Z to get ahead, and if that is at the cost of another human being or one of my morals, maybe I'll just take that chance. Number one, I think it's redefining on what that word means.
The independent music scene is probably more difficult than most people would know. Rope-A-Dope is celebrating 25 years of existence, and they've created great art, great relationships, great artists, even Grammy Awards. But it doesn't mean that everything is a bed of roses.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the Sound Connections podcast. Today is a different episode than what I usually do. We're talking about actual music and not just technology and innovation. Oh, well, it's a part of it. Louis and Fabian, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having us. Pleasure to be here.
It's great to be here.
So Rope-A-Dope is a label or community of labels. You can describe it best what that is, that has existed for 25 years and seen immense success. But you've been through an independent journey where you've had a take that's been a bit different. So I'm very excited to talk about running independent record labels, releasing music, sort of your niche and your subgenres, and most of all your philosophies on the way, and sort of dissect that and how it relates to today. But Louis and Fabian, if you could each tell me who are you and what do you do in whatever order you choose.
Maybe I'll let you begin.
Oh my goodness.
I'll ask you to begin.
Well, thanks, Jacob. I really appreciate giving us some time here in front of your audience. It's really an honor. And Fabian Brown, nobody special by any means. I've been with Rope-A-Dope knocking on a decade. So 10 years in this crazy thing called the music business industry. Actually, no business in music business. I'm a saxophonist. I play. I'm a creative. And, found a friendship with Louis and, who was running Rope-A-Dope at the time, and got into a situation where I was segueing out of the music education industry. And Louis was open to some help around the office, and here I was. And, almost a decade later, I'm supporting and advocating for artists, our independent artists on the label. Celebrating 25 years this year in music, which is incredible and extraordinary. And, all that time meeting some great musicians, and just helping them do what they do best, getting out of the creative, minutia of what it is to create an album, and just really helping on the business side of things and helping them, gain further reach to their audience.
Great.
Yeah, I'm Louis Marks. I got involved with Rope-A-Dope in a chaotic time in the music business. That would have been 2001 or 2. I began creating clothing for Rope-A-Dope apparel. That was kind of the buzzword at the time to help artists increase their revenue. And in 2006, I purchased the label and began to take the reins, if you will. I would call myself a really bad serial entrepreneur. Somehow in the process of all this, my philosophy and my heart end up interfering with the commerce in some way or another. So really thank you for saying that we're extremely successful. And I would say that that's actually true when it comes to the creative and the cultural things that we've built. And yet it is still an absolute struggle to maintain in the independent sector of the music business.
As I talked with you guys before we sort of started recording, I was looking through your website, and the audience can go through the website and read sort of 25 years of updates of what happened in the company. And I think there's one point in like late 10s, there was a comment like struggling to some degree. I can't remember. And I thought it was a really interesting contrast because the section before and the section after was like won a Grammy, like kind of thing. So I would love to understand sort of why and how to sort of elaborate on that thought and that process. I think everyone who listens to the podcast knows that the music industry is not an industry we go for just purely monetary gain, or that would be at least a very weird motivation. But especially independent sector on, I would say, the world that you operate within, there's a lot of risk, and the upside is somewhat limited, which means you need to navigate waters in a different way. So let's understand that. But before we get into that, I think, well, actually, could you elaborate on it? What is it? How does it feel like? How is it to operate as an independent company in the current landscape of music, even if you're quote unquote successful?
Simply put, chaos. It's very chaotic. What we've learned in the last couple of years, they've been a time of deep reflection as we come up on 25 years. Also, we had, that pandemic thing where we all asked ourselves, what is the purpose? What are we doing? Why are we doing it? Do we want to drive to work, or do we want to work from home? What's the real meaning of all this? Where we are right now, very simply at looking at I'll say very clearly that in the time that I've been doing this, from 2003 when Napster happened to 2008 and the crash and all of the things, this is the most challenging time. There is, without a doubt, this is the most challenging. What we've done in this process of reflection is to recalibrate our perspective. And you just mentioned 1 year was down and the next year was a Grammy, and then the next year was down. So when you recalibrate your perspective and realize that winning a Grammy is not the end game and doesn't mean everything that you think it means, then you begin to reassess how you view this. And I just want to say one more piece on that. The recorded music business is a small part of the entire music business, and it has an outsized influence in people's minds. We're from education straight through to all of the ways that music is involved in our lives. Grammys and charts are a small fraction, and yet we look at that as the measure of success. So that's where we are today.
Interesting. Well, I can see that the same philosophical vibe as I got from the website is going to continue in this talk. I love that. No, I love that. But I would love to do sort of a run through of your history, and it doesn't need to be extensive because I think we're going to have a few stops with philosophy and perspectives throughout your whole journey. But can you briefly tell me about the start? Like, how did this come into play, Robodope and your label, and sort of how did it develop the early days?
So I want to just point out to listeners right away that in the coming months, we are creating a website that will narrate this story.
Wow.
It'll be a beautiful, scrolling documentary film, if you will, that will take time, that will describe it. But Rope-A-Dope began in 1999 when DJ Logic decided that he wanted to use a turntable as a solo instrument in a jazz band. And they took that to some record labels, and there was a lot of head scratching that went on and a lot of no's because it just didn't make any sense. However, on the street, in the Knitting Factory, at the downtown New York clubs, and on festival tours, it was everything. People just went nuts. So, after releasing the record, the founders, Andy Hurwitz, John Medeski, had to fill out a form to export CDs to Japan, and they asked what label it was on. So they said, we need a label name. So they came up with the label name after much back and forth, and the label was born. And, it was almost immediately signed by Ahmet Ertegun at Atlantic Records. They had offices in Midtown and started cranking out some absolutely wonderful projects. The Philadelphia Experiment, Tin Hat Trio featuring Willie Nelson, Sex Mob, even signed Charlie Hunter from Blue Note. So they just, came out swinging. And then, of course, ran right into the wall of the Napster years. So that's the early part of the label. It moved on with, sorry, go on. We can break this up in pieces. Yeah.
It's all good. I have an interesting thought because already here, there's something about having a subculture that you guys are sort of serving. the major labels, the commercial believers didn't really believe in the first product. I guess this sort of sets the tone for the rest of our journey to some degree.
100%.
Lewis is always telling me that when he receives a phone call or an email about, hey, I got this record, I got this project, 9 out of 10 times, I don't think it's the first call is Rope-A-Dope, as in to say they've shopped this bad boy around for a minute or two, and then here it comes, right? And maybe that's through the proxy of their their friends or other artists that have on label, or maybe not, but. It really is interesting that you say subculture. My entrance point for Rope-A-Dope was a little bit, around the same time. The Philadelphia experiment kind of put me onto the vibe at Rope-A-Dope. At the time, I was in college at university. In Philadelphia, the whole neo soul movement, even though it wasn't called that at that point, but that was emerging, and there was a lot of excitement in Philadelphia. There's a lot of momentum, live music and hip hop, and the fusion of all these things were really coming together. And, my entrance point on the business side of Rope-A-Dope really came later on with artists like Chief Ajua and Terrace Martin, which yet again, were creating a fantastic blend of what really spoke to them. For me, from my point of view, Rope-A-Dope is a destination for artists to creatively express what they want to express, create something new, something fresh, without guys like me and Lewis, getting into that creative piece.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, in many degrees, that's the fundamental difference between, these very hyper-commercial projects and what you guys do is sort of facilitating the environment in which they can succeed within their creativity. Well, that can go for anything, but I think you do it in a different way. But let's continue the story a bit. So this happened. There was sort of an immediate launch that made sense.
Yes, and I mentioned the Napster years. Those were times when suddenly the forecasting and the sales perspective changed drastically. I mean, when I entered the business, a typical CD pressing was 5,000 units. I think the minimums were 1,000 at that point. That has changed dramatically. There were a couple of points where there was a possibility of a buyer. Artemis Records, Danny Goldberg was one in the process. There were other groups of venture capitalists shopping around. But nobody was comfortable. The founders of both the record label and the clothing business, who were then working together, really were not comfortable.
And to have such buyers, what was the attractive side of it? Was there financials at the point that was interesting, or was it just simply the brand?
There were definitely some record sales. I'm not sure that translated through to a solid balance sheet. Due to the amounts of money that were spent on some of the records. But look, I mean, I got to give a shout out to Andy Hurwitz. So like, you don't run into people like this. They're cowboys. They're rebels. He's everything James Dean and beyond. And, Dean Moriarty, and, he just shoots like he calls it and just goes. He tells a great story of the accounting people came in and said, let me see your P&L. And he's like, what's P&L? Philadelphia loss? Like, what is that? So it was, there was a lot of like, let's just go. And that spirit, it can be reckless, and there definitely been down times, but that spirit is really the kind of spirit that you need when you're dealing with creative output, whether it be art or music, right? So, and we've tried to keep that, but also keep the balance sheet from being a disaster. So I think that people were looking at potential revenue and liking it. But the amount of ownership that they would have taken and the amount of creative control and business control that they would have applied to the label was not going to be acceptable. And that's when I stepped in. And that was right around 2006. And the big record that year was King Britt Presents Sister Gertrude Morgan, which was a New Orleans roots record combined with Philadelphia musical artistry and electronics. It's pretty wild album, and it's in the Library of Congress for a reason. But that record was due out on a Tuesday after Hurricane Katrina. So, I would call that time one of almost despair. The challenges were just, we were on the ropes, so to speak. And that was, and right afterwards, we released an album from DJ Clock, who tragically took his own life, right when the record was coming out. It's, and it was like, so we're no stranger to the challenges, that knock you down. And so that began the next phase of attrition and caution for a good 4 years of releasing local artists from Philadelphia, New York, maybe a couple from overseas, but nothing of the scale that you see later on in the label. And then we signed a little band out of University of North Texas, who had 5 people in the audience by the name of Snarky Puppy, and began the road to supporting them and some others, and birthed the Ground Up label. And again, things started to grow. So that's kind of chapter 2, or act 2 of the play, is 06 to 11.
For me, I grew up with a very casual relationship to music. My family was musically inclined, but nothing beyond, they can play piano. And Snarky Puppy for me was, I think, one of the first bands to really broaden my horizon on what music means, besides just the mainstream commercial. Like they had so much influence on a whole generation of musicians and music professionals. It's quite fascinating. Again, still to this day, I'm even though I love music and I'm definitely a music industry person, I think that is one of the bands that still stands most strong in my memory of sort of defining my understanding of what music can be. So that must have been an amazing time to sort of be a label and be with them, or was it still a struggle and didn't really translate into business? What was the case there?
It was 100% a struggle. Yeah, I mean, like I said, there were 5 people in the audience, but they relentlessly revisited communities. They would play Hattiesburg, Mississippi. They would come back to the same place again and again and again. And we were preparing the 4th album for release by the time the Grammys happened. And it's their 8th album that we were preparing. We Like It Here. So it was years. And I'll tell you, I mean, I have the email receipts. I mean, no one replied to us. I'm talking about the major magazines. I'm not going to name some names, but as soon as the Grammy happened, then suddenly people started to open our emails.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it was very successful, and that's probably why the upbeat note at the end of 2013 or 2012 threw right in there. But it was a struggle. There's no doubt.
Fabian, I'm going to ask you a question. Obviously, this was right around the time you sort of joined, as far as I remember. But what is the underlying mission or drive that makes you take these risks over and over again?
Oh man, that's a loaded question. I don't know if there's an answer to that question. What's the underlining? Here's what I've learned from working with Lewis and working at Rope-A-Dope. People first, right? It's always people. It's always about if I had $1 for every time I heard Lewis enrolling or bringing an album in before he heard one note of the album, I mean, I could probably just retire off of that. He is definitely a person that is most interested in what makes that person tick. Who are they as a human being, right? And then we can discuss the music, and then we can discuss your goals, and then we can discuss on where you want to go, right? Lewis has helped build a brand that will last long beyond any of us here on this podcast. I'm sure of it. That's again based on the type of music and that we're curating and the type of people that we're associating with, to be quite honest. So the mission, that's a great question, Jacob. For me personally, I just love being in a space where I'm around creative people that are saying something significant through their voice or through their instrument or through their compositions, right? For me, that's extremely exciting, understanding music and playing music. I never really had that gear, really never had that button. So when I'm around a space of people that have that, I admire that, right? And usually what comes with that is a void in other areas, like a void in, how to put their metadata together and how to deliver that to, DSPs. Like there's always a disconnect. There's always
You might write the spreadsheets.
I mean, that's the truth, right? There's these creative masterminds that we get to spend time with, and like, oh my gosh, there's this aura around them, and then all of a sudden you say, hey, Google Drive, and they're like, what's that? It's like, it's not that bad, but it really is a disconnect. So I like being able to support from a position of knowing something that they don't, so we can all advance, and grow their community, grow their audience, grow their reach. And, growth doesn't always happen and look like that. I got to be honest, not every release happens that way. Sometimes it takes several to build the momentum. But for me, my personal piece, what drives me to be a part of this collective called Rope-A-Dope is just playing a small part in the growth of where they want to go, understanding their goals and really just getting behind that and guiding them in a sense. I couldn't guide them creatively through their creative process, but we can definitely guide them through, the infrastructure of business and, growing a reach and growing a brand.
I think it's really interesting to think. I think a lot about pioneers because there's something very unfair about that term most of the time, where it's people who lead the way, early adapters that are not necessarily seeing the fruits of their labor on many different fronts. But then again, when it comes to what actually matters to people, the legacy you leave behind, they're the ones who are remembered.
Huh.
But that's not something that pays the bills, being remembered or recognized. And I think especially for you guys as the business infrastructure side of a lot of these people, I think that must also be a struggle, like knowing that you artists might be a pioneer and we'll do every bit we can to make sure that you can survive, but most likely, we won't provide much other than whatever legacy you leave behind. That must be a very interesting thing to navigate.
Interesting. Go ahead.
I will. Yeah, no, I mean, I would love to jump right in on that. So I'll start first by demonstrating what I want to say, and that is, Fabian Brown talks about being part of the thing, and it's just good to be near creatives and this and that. But here's a man who had zero knowledge of how to do publicity and marketing within the music business, who has developed a network to where, I've been told by magazine editors that he's one of the top publicists in the world. So his ability to connect with people and to be real, both creatives and business types, is unmatched, right? So the reason I bring that out right now is we don't have to accept the notion that people who are quote pioneers, who are leading us forward, are going to get their flowers sometime in the future. We live in a world where we are directly reflecting at every moment. We have the ability to do that. And I don't accept that that's the way the world is. I think that people should be motivated at present to acknowledge what's happening in real time and celebrate the people and get on board with them instead of getting on board with whatever the last tech billionaire told us is the future. Let's do it now.
I have a question which is future-oriented, and I work a lot with technology, and I interview a lot of people who are thought leaders within new technologies space. And today I just released an article on LinkedIn, sort of a prediction of the future of music creation. And I might be completely wrong, and I might also be arrogant for releasing that LinkedIn article, but I'm just going to stand behind all of my guests who said something. But one of the really interesting observations and beliefs we have is that the craving for human connection is going to increase a lot as we're going to be flooded with content, not knowing how to navigate what is what. Do you believe that the financial value of that is going to benefit the type of artists you're working with, or is it still not going to translate? If you believe that the human connection is going to be the most sought after thing in a moment.
You want me to go, Lewis? Because first of all, Jacob, you got some really good ones there. I have this, I have this love, hate, fear, hope when it comes to technology. It's really kind of like, depends on what day you catch me and, what article I just read or what podcast I just listened to, right? There are listen, it's a tool. Technology is a tool, and you can give one guy a hammer, he's going to build a phenomenal house. You give another guy a hammer, he's going to go out and murder somebody, right? And everything in between. So I think the tools are up to the people who are using them and how they go about that, right? What we've seen is a lot of people that have a lot of power with technology and not do so much good things. Maybe it's good things for the few. It's not good for the independent. It's not good for the people who are creating, and I'm going to say it, creating art, right? Creating contemporary art, not creating music, not creating pop hits, creating art, right? Something that will last the test of time, something that in 20, 30, 50, 100 years from now, you can re-listen to that music and it means something to you, right? That's the type of music that Rope-a-Dope represents and that we want to get behind. And technology can advance that, and maybe they can support that financially, but we have evidence that it's not advancing that. We have evidence already today that it's hindering that it's to the selected few. This is where I can go down a rabbit hole. I'm gonna stop talking and maybe let Lewis say me here, because I can
let me go down the rabbit hole.
I can feel myself getting. It's a good question, Jacob.
Thanks for leading me right to the edge. Yeah. I hear completely what Fabian is saying about the technology being able to be used for good or not for good, and that people will be different. But I don't want to leave it up to, as if people don't have a choice or an ability. And I want to give people a clue, right? If we look back over the last few years of advancements in technology, we saw the metaverse rise. We saw cryptocurrency rise and fall and rise again. And now everyone's talking about AI. The persistent message that comes from these platforms and the people who are advancing these tools is, this is your future. Get on board now. And what's happening is everybody's just doing that and jumping on board, and then finds out that they have no privacy, they have no ownership, and they're just being swept along. So the mental decision has to be made. It is your hammer. You can use it. And it's the first thing that has to happen, is think about how you would like to use it and what you can use it for. I started on AI a year ago and was like, okay, let's go. And then I went, wait a minute, what's happening here? How long will this last? How is this going to unfold? How are we going to use it properly? And I just backed off. I just took a break, and I'll come back to it. We'll see what it is. But what we know so far is that every single song that we have ever released has been scraped by the likes of an AI company. And I've done the tests because we had some very unique music. I said, make me a Snarky Puppy Colonel Bruce Hampton mashup. And I can tell what it's drawing from. It says that it's can't be Snarky Puppy, but I know where it's coming. I can hear it, right? So the question, the first thing that I think has to happen is we need to stop and reframe it. We are humans. We have control of our destiny. We have to think about the future that we want and take the steps necessary in order to preserve it. And the rest will do what the rest does. There's the rabbit hole.
No, and it's really interesting, and I'm very much in it. I lean towards, I don't have an opinion on it, but I'm very much technical curious to see what the future holds from a commercial perspective, and not because I necessarily belong to that belief, but as an entrepreneur, I think it's my responsibility to explore what it means to the livelihood of creating businesses. But it's a very, very interesting perspective. Okay, let's go a bit back to the story. We went through some rabbit holes, which is what I love, but I would also love within the time frame we have to get a bit further into the story. So you signed Snarky Puppy. I told how changed I was in my music perspective. A lot of people was, but what happened after that?
Well, I'll go back to the time. I mentioned that it was a challenging time. Attrition was the word. And when I say attrition, I mean there is no office. I'm working from home, and that's the existence of Rope-A-Dope at that point, right?
Wow.
We put out, Tell Your Friends from Snarky Puppy. We talked about the future. We talked about, what would be beneficial to Michael League and the band. We started the Ground Up label because he wanted to release albums from his friends. At the time, we also, I was traveling down to Atlanta to meet some people, and then I traveled to Dallas to meet that core that really made Snarky Puppy not just your college band, right? I'm talking about Spud Seawright and R.C. Williams and those cats, right? And Sean Martin. And I saw music communities, basically, and I saw music communities that were disconnected from each other. It was interesting. Like, they all have the same goals and we're doing the same kinds of things and the same kind of exploration. But people, unless you knew somebody in Atlanta, you weren't, and the fans definitely weren't connecting. So my vision at the time was to try to build a music community, a connected tissue, if you will, to bring these people together. And we started with groups. I don't think we had Slack at the time, but we had something. Can't remember what it was, what the first tool was that we grabbed onto and said, hey, this is a cool free tool that we can all communicate. And that's what set the explosive growth, if you will, from 2013 after Snarky Puppy's Grammy win into like 2018 and 19. We're talking about Mark DeClydlo, Christian Scott, Tunde Ajwa. We're talking about Terrace Martin. We're talking about Eddie Palmieri, like Ramsey Lewis, like, big names, unknown people. I think at one point we were releasing 70 albums in a given year with a crew of 5 or 6 people and just cooking. And it was beautiful. And it wasn't just us going and getting it. It was just a reflection of what was really happening in contemporary art during those years. So, that brings us up to the time that Fabian came on board, and, we're really going. I look back on it and I'm just exhausted.
It's a lot. It's a lot, Louis. It's a lot, and again, my perspective is it's a lot of good stuff because, you talk about preserving art and, and this is a good segue here. You talk about, the Charlie Parkers and the Louis Armstrongs, or, the Wynton Marsalis's, or the Miles Davises, right? And you got guys like Wynton, who's like, we're uplifting this this tradition, right? We're paying homage to the greats, right? And that's important. That's extremely important. And just as important, I think, is looking at what the contemporary artists are doing today and capturing that, right? And honoring that today. Because with the technology, kind of going back down this rabbit hole a little bit, anyone and everyone is a composer, right? With a couple of keystrokes, with some great tools, you can do some phenomenal things. So where's the separation? You talked about, is AI going to be a tool to help monetize and help, commercialize? I don't even like those things. I like, here's what I like. I like great music, great art, and putting that into the hands, into the ears of people who really, really appreciate that. And the byproduct of that, hopefully, the byproduct of that is dollars and cents. And there's some people out there, there's some, what's a good word for, some philanthropists, there's some people, some organizations that really see this art as like, oh, we have to preserve this, we have to perpetuate this, right? I would encourage artists to see and understand what their music is speaking to and connect with organizations and collaborate with people who that resonates with, and bring those communities together. If anything, I think that's the future of music, with the assistance of tools like AI and all these other things. But really, it's that community. You'll never go. I think it was a podcast I was watching. I think it was yours, as a matter of fact. I forget the guest, but you talked about that. You talked about all this stuff. At the end of the day, you know what you can't replace with technology is community. The desire for people wanting to still get into a room and have an experience. So. It's not just going to be one thing. I think it's going to be several things in conjunction with one another.
Yeah. I have a question, and I have a bit of a lead up to it. So I have a luxury in life, and that is that I started music very late. I was 17, and I went full-time music when I was 19. But I was never a good musician. I didn't really had anyone around me that knew music, and I made a living from music running a music studio. And I studied at one of the greatest schools for contemporary art and music at my bachelor's, but I was never really a part of that group. I'm a founder, raised capital, other kind of stuff, but I'm never really a part of that culture. So I'm in this intersection where I've been exposed to a lot of different worlds, but I don't really place myself in any of them. And I feel myself an observer, really, which gives me a lot of benefit and a lot of disadvantages when it comes to community. But my question is, how would you describe art? Because for me, I intellectually understand the concept, and I can feel it when I experience it, but I'm not quite sure how I would define it. So could you help me understand, what does art mean for you, and why does it matter?
Could I next question, please? Yeah. That's a big one. That's a big one. And that what crossed my mind was, do I really want to go on record answering that question? And yet it intrigues me. First thing I want to say is that if you're a perennial outsider, then you are 100% rope-a-dope.
Well, good.
I feel that.
I feel in good company.
So, and the benefit to, maybe you'll agree, but the benefit to being an outsider is the ability to see outside of what those who are insiders are stuck with, right? The narrative that they're stuck with. I view art. There are a lot of things that come to us in this world that we don't understand. And there are a couple of ways to view the world. You can either see how absolutely beautiful and ridiculous this little thing, this set design is that we live in. It's phenomenal. I mean, the light changes every few minutes. It's never the same. Then water moves and trees and, all the beauty of nature and life and humans as well. Shining buildings. It's just amazing, right? So you can look at it that way. But most of the time we look at it another way, of self-interest and planning for the future and feeling that we're not going to achieve anything. I'm in the rabbit hole now, right? And so we look at it from the other perspective. This does tie into my original statements. When someone is listening and is able to get into that headspace where they hear something beautiful and then translate it or see something beautiful and then learn the skills necessary to take that thing that they felt and can see and translate it into a piece of music or a painting or a photograph or an act of kindness to give it out to the rest of us, it's a little reminder. It's a little reminder of reality, the real thing, not what's in our head of, I'm not going to make it across the river or I'm going to die, which is basically where my brain is most of the time. You've got to run out of money. What's going to happen, So that's what art is, or at least that's the role of the artist. I had a great conversation with someone, I turned on the tap and I said, everybody thinks this is where the water comes from. Everybody does. It comes from the tap. Well, we all know, you as an artist know it's not coming from there. It's coming from somewhere else. And an artist and art is a person who goes and finds the source and brings it to us and hopefully uplifts us.
Oh. That was a much better answer than I expected.
No.
Amazing. Well done. Okay. It's so funny. This is a small irony. While getting ready for this podcast, I just put my kids to bed. I just need to put a new T-shirt on, and the top T-shirt I had was this one. It says "Best Nights VC," a venture capital firm doing investment space by a bank backed by Jägermeister, and it kind of feels really funny that that's sort of, to some degree, the opposite end. Not really, but there's so many contrasts to music and nightlife and experiences. But art as the thing bringing us back to reality is quite striking. I've actually never thought about it that way. And
Cool.
I think a lot of the founders and entrepreneurs listening to this podcast are chasing something different than that. And I'm not saying that that's wrong. On this podcast, I keep on getting reminded that as I pursue knowledge, I often forget the base.
Sure.
And I think you can translate to anything within careers, music. As we pursue success or commercialization, we forget the base. Is that why you keep on going? Because of that base, people need reminding?
I don't know if it's, man, you're good. I don't know if it's people needing reminding. It's like, and it's not anyone's fault. We're indoctrinated every single day that this is the definition of success. If my bank account doesn't have this many zeros, or I have to do X, Y, and Z to get ahead, and if that is at the cost of another human being or something, one of my morals, maybe I'll just take that chance and take that risk. It's scary out there. But then we have art, which grounds us, which makes us, at least for me, allows us to express in a certain way, or we look at someone's art or listen to someone's art and we have an experience through their expression. It kind of brings it back to the basics, right? And again, as I said this earlier, this is why I love, the artists that we attract, is because they are really trying to say something that's on their mind, but they have all the other problems, right? How are they going to pay for their bills? How are they going to put food on the table? How are they going to get their kids from here to there? They have all the same problems everyone else has, but they have this crazy dream, sometimes delusional, that if they just did this or they just did that they're going to find success. So number one, I think it's redefining on what that word means to everyone, right? Two, I think is being a little bit open and diversifying on how you're creating your art and where those sources and resources coming from. And I don't think there's just one answer, bro. I really, I don't know. What I do know, there is a lot of things that won't get made. There's a lot of art that won't get created if it continues to perpetuate the way that it's happening right now. And that's the risk. We all take this for granted as if it's going to be here forever. But give it some time. AI will be making all the music, and where's the real art going to go? I don't know. I'm kind of exaggerating.
I want to segue off that if I can, because bringing it back to reality. So, little story: the Impressionists, the painters in Italy and France in the 1800s. There were amazing new technology developments at that time in the range of colors that a person could paint with. It was technologically driven, and yet completely rejected by where the culture had in their mind that art could go and what it was about. So they worked independently. It's very similar. They had their own exhibitions that failed repeatedly, and they were kept alive through patronage. If you study Albert Barnes, he would fly to Paris and pay the rent for a couple of months. And Monet and Renoir would hand him a couple of paintings, and he'd bring them back. And he was ridiculed by the art establishment. No one understood what he's doing. And now it's billions and billions of dollars. I say that just to say, we can reset the frame and look at contemporary art and AI and the technological developments, but just reset the way we go about it in order to have a financial model that works, but we can't do that if we continue to run. I don't have a problem with the technology. It's the messaging that you have to run into the future, because that's where everybody's going and you don't have a choice. Stop for a second, think about what's valuable, and then apply cautiously and proceed.
I have a difficult question. And that is, right now, I think a lot. And I have one concept I'm struggling with right now that I'm trying to research from a more academic perspective. And that is the concept of value of music, or market valuation, whatever you want to call it. Like there's a disproportionate amount of impact from music that reaches people from the monetary value it receives. And there's a lot of things that plays into that. But do you have an idea of what should or need to take place in the future in order to bridge the gap between the impact and the value received by artists like yours? What needs to happen to make this more sustainable?
That doesn't sound like a difficult question. The other one
good.
was
I'm looking forward to this
difficult. Because I'm leading up to it, and this is like the alley-oop. Just chop it right in.
Go for it.
For me, the reason that music is devalued currently is because of the tech platforms, because they've set the price, right? 100 million songs for $10 a month. They've just, it's just like cryptocurrency. That's the price, or stock shares. That's what they did, right? What needs to happen is patronage. So there needs to be a direct pathway, a platform that connects donors with musicians in a responsible way and in a powerful way. And music needs to reconnect to community. And all of this is very confusing. It seems simple, but the problem with music also, I'm recognizing as you ask the question, what is the value of a cheeseburger, right? So think about that for a second. Well, it depends on where you get it. And it depends on who's selling it. The value of a cheeseburger at a Wendy's and the value of a cheeseburger at an organic farm restaurant are two completely different things. The problem is we're all at the Wendy's. All the musicians are all pushing all this. They're selling it through the Wendy's drive-thru window. So no one can tell the difference between what's good and what's not. And their tastes are being curated by an algorithm, right? So 3 steps: 1, patronage; 2, connect it back to communities. And what I mean by that is artists should be playing in towns at the state fair and not at the Blue Note. For a jazz artist, you should play at your local community center where people are gathering to talk about social and town issues, connect with humans. That's 3.
You said community platforms through patronage. I don't know if they're tied together.
Patronage, connect with community. Yeah, it'll come back to me.
I was gonna say more of an educational or unlearning of the things that we are being told every single day. I'm not sure that's your where you were going, Lewis, but for me, it's like it's definitely, again, Jacob, you're on a quest. It's very obvious that you are a sponge. You host this podcast to get like-minded people and learn and extract information, right? You are you're like where's the Encyclopedia Britannica? You're probably too young to remember what that is, but you're on that route, dude. I can see it, right? And I think there's a bit of maybe undoing some of the things that you've learned that may also help for all of us. I'm not picking on you. I'm just saying for all of us.
No, that's amazing. And I'm still on a journey for that particular question to sort of find a source of clarity. I think what Lewis is getting into is definitely what resonates with me. But again, on the flip side, I never experienced community.
Huh.
For me, it's a theoretical thing. Like I can recognize it through numbers and history, and I think I'm not just speaking for myself when I say that. I'm 31. I don't know what music community feels like.
Huh.
I have no idea what you're talking about. Other than, I can transfer it to, I grew up in a religious upbringing. I know what that means. I can assume it's something similar. But I think
Wow.
that's where a lot of people get lost. We don't know what it means.
Well, this is a good three then. So I view that as symptomatic of the modern music business. I have this conversation with people often when I talk about music from the 60s or 70s, pre-80s, when production values started to change. And I say, well, they're doing a full Lush song and there'll be a horn section in it. And people will say, I don't hear that. You just have a great ear. And the key is you have to work to develop. Start with your own human algorithm and start to think about what the music means to you and what you do like and what you don't like. I'll take it back. And the reason I'm really passionate about this is I grew up in a family of 10. I was number 8. So I saw the culture, the way music changed the culture from my oldest brothers who were listening to blues music and early rock and roll to my sisters who were listening to Motown. It affected the way they dressed. It affected the way they danced. It affected the way they socialized and who they dated. And then my next brothers, the next 3, were diverse people, anywhere from, Fairport Convention and English folk to the Kinks, to Yes and prog rock, to Sly and the Family Stone. So I lived through a golden age where music was not just something to do as a form of entertainment, but it informed your values and your style and went even further, because nowadays I guess I was radicalized. But yeah, at a very young age at camp in 1967, 68, 69, I'm hearing all this music that the counselors are playing. And I adopted a pretty radical perspective. Now, it spoke to who I was, I suppose, but it just affirmed that I could be independent and I could be different and I could be an outsider. And I'm talking, these songs are not a game. When you talk about Fortunate Son from Creedence and you talk about the Rolling Stones and you even talk about Bowie and the Kinks and Lou Reed, embracing and telling an entire generation of gay people that they were okay, they're cool. Like, it is so powerful, but we've somehow forgotten that is the true power of music.
Wow.
And so I suppose it's just an excavation. It's a process of going back and putting the song on and really thinking about it. And when we do it? When we're in trouble.
Yeah.
When we go through a breakup, a divorce, a death, something like that. Now we're like, okay, now Bill Withers is speaking to me. I get it, or whomever. It may be somebody current. It doesn't have to be an older person. It's just the time that I grew up, But it's work, but it's worth it.
Yeah.
You touch about something now, and since we started with the end of the podcast, I'm going to stop the journey here and ask a question at the end. And I'm going to ask you guys for some advice. And the premise for the question is that, as I told, I started late with music. And I thought for a long time that I was in love with music. But what I realized is that I fell in love with creating stuff. And music became the craft I was good at. I was knowledgeable about music. I'm a guy who catches things fast. So music is what I knew, which means I had a love for music at one point, and I still do, above the average consumer. I definitely love the music industry because of its complexity. But what I hear here through this talk and through many conversations I've had before is that there's a love I haven't quite found yet.
Cool.
And if that's the art we're talking about, I think I might represent a lot of people in my generation or just in general, where the question is, how can I fall in love with music? What do I need to do to desensitize whatever's around me? And I know I love creation, sure. I think a lot of people love a lot of things. But how can I fall in love with music again? Because at the end of the day, the appreciation, the value of music comes from that, I guess. So what's your advice? How do I need to go about it?
I think we're going to have two different answers. Fabian, you want to start?
We are definitely probably going to have two different answers. I mean, Jakob, I hear what I hear, just like there's a desire, there's a destination that you want to get to, there's something that you want access to that you feel that you don't have access to. I would argue that. I would probably ask you a bunch of questions that I would probably uncover that you actually do have a source of creativity inside of you, and you are probably connected to some great people. And that's where that would be my advice. My advice would be, dude, open up your phone or go through your email or wherever your wherever your contacts are, right? And call somebody up and like let's get up for coffee, let's get up for dinner, let's have a whiskey, like whatever that looks like for you, and start hanging out with some creatives and start asking some brilliant questions and ask them about their process. And you know what? Even take it a step further. Hey, the next time you're creating, can I hang out? Can I just be a fly on the wall? Like, what's that all about? I think sometimes just getting immersed in something is just the way to do it, right? You wanted to grow your entrepreneurship chops. What are you going to do? You're going to hang out with some entrepreneurs who are a little bit ahead of you, who've been there, done that, who've made some mistakes, so you don't got to make those same mistakes. I mean, it doesn't mean like you have to be a wicked guitar player to hang out with musicians. You could just be a good human being that wants to hang out with some creatives. So go and do that. Go and hang out with some people. And I could, just knowing and listening and watching your podcast, you already got that, man. You got some creatives in there. So go do that. You'll be fine. That's my 2 cents to what you're saying. I don't know what you're gonna say, Louis.
That's great.
Yeah, it's gonna be totally different, right? So I'm gonna say go within. Go within and think about people that are in your life that are important. Think about people that have passed. Think about what the meaning of all this is while listening to some music. I'm a heavy lyric person, so I think that reading lyrics. If you find a lyric of a given artist, now you can use the tool, have the algorithm lead you to some other ones, and then just you got to constantly adjust it. But understand the words, the poetry. Another interesting trick that works for me, and this happened to me once as a young man. I was driving up this won't mean anything to you for where you are, the New Jersey Turnpike. I guess everybody's heard of that, right? What exit? I happened to be driving up the New Jersey Turnpike in the 80s, and Duke Ellington came on the radio, and a police officer pulled onto the highway, so everyone slowed down to 45 miles per hour. And the synchronization of the traffic and the music was an amazing dance. It has happened to me repeatedly in my life. It happened the other day when I put on Nina Simone at the gym, and suddenly every single person in the gym is exercising to the rhythm of the music. And you're just like, what is happening right now? So I'm going to go with lyrics and I'm going to go with rhythm. So like if you try to find a song that fits the rhythm of the activity around you, whether it's natural or human activity, and understand that, get in that zone, then you're going to find other things that'll put you in that zone.
Amazing. Well, guys, I asked that question on behalf of myself and the listeners. I think we need to get reminded about what this is about. But I really appreciate this talk. I think this is something I need to talk more about. I need to talk more about art, because as technology develops and comes, and entrepreneurs need to make viable businesses, we can forget too fast, too quickly, what this starts with, and probably also what it ends with. So thank you for your time.
Jakob, thanks so much for having us. It's been really a pleasure.
Yeah, honor.